Hello everybody and welcome to the Sovereign Village Project. I'm out here at the 5-acre site on a beautiful, rainy, gloomy day, which is kind of my favorite kind of day, being originally from Oregon. But I wanted to show an example of a garden in transition between seasons and plantings. We definitely do succession gardening here with our annuals, but we kind of do so in a more chaotic manner, and this is the most chaotic of all gardens. This is about a 10 by 10 patch, and originally we had no plan. Earlier this spring when we were actually starting the house build, we were farming at our other site and gardening over there, but we just wanted to start something, to start making this place feel like home. And so we just started throwing whatever leftover seeds we had. If we had a packet of radish seeds, we threw it in. A packet of watermelon seeds or some free seedlings or something, it all went in here. And it's been a really interesting experiment in polycultures as a result, because there is a little bit of everything growing in here. But I don't want to share the experiment so much with you right now. What I want to show you is a good example of succession planting and how when you really think of gardening as a year-round activity, or at least kind of a 9-month activity in this climate, or more, really year-round, you always have things coming and you have things going. Instead of just thinking of things in blocks, like there will always be tomatoes here and then there will be radishes here. Instead, you have things in transition and growing at the same time. Right now we've got all of these melon vines, and they're still working really hard to produce us with whatever weird science experiment melons we have growing in here. But as they're growing and creating virtually a mulch, almost like a jungle-like canopy over this little ecosystem, look what happens when you peer inside of it. Poking through, we have our cold weather winter crops. This one's probably a daikon radish. We have radishes coming up, we have turnips, we have beets, rutabagas, I think maybe some parsnips in there. But you can see this whole understory, almost as if it's a little forest of winter crops coming up through. And so now I, as the gardener, have the job of looking at the situation and saying, you know what, these melons are about at the end that we're coming up on a freeze really soon. Probably in the next couple of weeks we'll certainly be past the potential first frost date. So I'm going to go ahead and assume my melons are about done growing and start selecting for the winter crops that are coming up. I'm going to start taking out these leaves and start making light and nutrients and room for the turnips and the radishes and the root crops and the greens and kales. I think we have some kale in here too. All of those guys that live in between. And then I'll continue to maintain in that way. And then right here we have our okra. And as that okra is pretty much wrapping up its season, we'll harvest the last of that and we'll make some more room for it. And so this is a really great way to garden in a small space and get maximum production. Or even a large space, you should still focus all of your energies into one area that you can actually maintain. And so having things coming, having things going makes it easier, because you no longer think like, oh, when should I focus on harvesting, or when should I be planting? Instead, you're kind of always harvesting and you're always planting. These root crops didn't get all planted on the same day. It was mostly just me walking by and I grabbed a handful of daikon radish and turnip seeds. And a lot of them are spring ones. These are like a perennial garlic, and they're starting to come back up, and they were planted earlier in the spring. And again, they're just coming up through this overstory of the summer plants. So just want to kind of get people to think of that kind of gardening, that method of an informal, constantly changing garden. It's not quite as clean cut as we like things to be. It's not formulaic, but it makes way more sense, because the amount of production and food I'm pulling out of this 10 by 10 space, which had no plan, and the soil is barely amended. It's huge. I've gotten tomatoes, potatoes, a lot of good comfrey growing right now, which I'll hack up into root cuttings, and that's actually a commercial crop for me. We've got our okra. We had multiple kinds of tomatoes, leeks, onions, turnips, radishes, all of the root crops I mentioned, a little bit of kale and greens, all growing in this little space, and this was all only started a few months ago, this spring. So I'm going to continue to track those experiments, but the whole moral of this video is basically do succession planting in small spaces, especially when you're dealing with annuals. Start to learn what does well in cold weather and what does well in warm weather. In the spring, you plant the cold weather stuff. In the summer, the warm weather stuff. But it's not in complete blocks. Like, we kind of have 3 seasons because it becomes cold weather again in the fall. But really, it's more dynamic than that. And seeds are cheap right now. Get them while the getting's good. But like radish seeds, for example, you buy them in bulk, and it never hurts you to start the season early. Try it in February, try it in March, see how early you can get away with it. You only wasted a few seeds and you got some really important data as a result. So succession gardening, hopefully that's a good example and makes it really clear in folks' minds. In the meantime, everybody stay safe, be well, and happy homesteading.